In the harsh desert lands of 1880s Arizona territory, Aiyana, a young Apache woman cast out from her tribe for defying arranged marriage traditions, struggles to survive alone. When she ventures to the brutal frontier town of Dustrock to trade her handmade crafts for supplies, she witnesses the cruel treatment of Esperanza, an old, scarred mule being beaten by drunk cowboys. In a moment that changes both their lives forever, Aiyana rescues the broken animal, beginning an extraordinary journey of healing, friendship, and redemption that will test the very meaning of family and belonging. The sun blazed mercilessly over the red canyon walls as 22-year-old Aiyana pressed her back against the rough stone, her heart hammering like war drums. Below, the voices of her own people grew distant, angry, disappointed, final. "She has brought shame to our family. Let the desert claim her." The words of her father, Chief Nalnish, echoed off the canyon walls like the cry of a wounded eagle. Aiyana closed her dark eyes, feeling the sting of tears she refused to shed. Her long black hair whipped around her face in the desert wind, and she clutched the small bundle of her possessions, a worn blanket, a water gourd, her grandmother's turquoise necklace, and the beadwork tools that had been her only solace. 3 days ago she had stood before the tribal council and spoken words that sealed her fate. "I will not marry Takoda. I will not be traded like a horse for political alliance. I choose my own path." The memory burned worse than the desert sun. Her grandmother, Aiyana's only ally, had died 2 moons prior, taking with her the last voice of reason in Aiyana's world. Without her protection, the young woman became expendable, a bargaining chip in her father's quest for tribal unity. But Aiyana had inherited more than her grandmother's skill with beads and thread. She had inherited her fierce spirit and unwavering sense of justice. Even as the council pronounced her punishment, even as her own mother turned away in shame, Aiyana held her head high. Now alone in the wilderness for the first time in her life, that courage felt as fragile as morning frost. She slid down the canyon wall until she sat on the rocky ground, suddenly overwhelmed by the vast emptiness surrounding her. The Apache territory stretched endlessly in every direction, beautiful, harsh, and now forbidden to her. She was no longer Apache. She was nothing. The water in her gourd sloshed, barely half full. Her stomach cramped with hunger, having eaten only cactus carts and pine nuts for 2 days. Winter was coming to the high desert, and her thin duskin dress and rabbit fur blanket would not be enough when the cold winds howled through the canyons. But it was the loneliness that cut deepest. Aiyana had never been alone. Never. The Apache way was community, family, belonging to something greater than oneself. Now she was a ghost, walking between worlds, belonging to neither the white man's civilization nor her ancestral home. A red hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the afternoon silence. Aiyana watched it soar on the thermals, free and solitary, and felt a flicker of kinship. Perhaps being alone didn't have to mean being lost. She stood, brushing dust from her dress, and surveyed the harsh landscape with new eyes. Her grandmother had taught her to read the desert's secrets, where to find water, which plants held medicine, how to track game through rocky terrain. These skills, passed down through generations of Apache women, were her inheritance now. But survival required more than knowledge. It required trade. And trade meant venturing into the white settlements, places where Apache faces were met with suspicion at best, violence at worst. Aiyana opened her bundle and examined her grandmother's beadwork supplies. The old woman had been renowned for her intricate patterns, each design telling a story of their people. In her gnarled hands, simple glass beads became works of art that even white traders coveted. Could Aiyana's hands create the same magic? Could she transform her exile into opportunity? She spent the remaining daylight hours working by memory, her fingers gradually remembering the patterns her grandmother had taught her. A bracelet emerged, then a small pouch decorated with the sacred symbols of her people, the eagle, the bear, the 4 directions. The work soothed her troubled mind, connecting her to generations of Apache women who had sat in circles, sharing stories while their hands created beauty. As darkness fell, Aiyana built a small fire in the shelter of an overhanging rock. The flames cast dancing shadows on the canyon walls, and for a moment she imagined she heard her grandmother's voice in the crackling wood. "Every ending is also a beginning, little hawk. Trust in your wings." The next morning brought a harsh reality check. Aiyana woke shivering, her fire reduced to cold ashes, her water nearly gone. The nearest settlement was Dustrock, a rough mining town 2 days' walk to the east. She had never been there, but traders spoke of it in hushed tones, a place where fortunes were made and lost, where violence simmered just beneath the surface of every transaction. It was also her only hope. Aiyana packed her meager belongings, including the beadwork pieces she had completed. If she could trade these for supplies, she might survive long enough to establish herself somewhere, somehow. The walk to Dustrock tested every survival skill her grandmother had taught her. Aiyana rationed her water carefully, chewing bits of jerky and pine nuts to stave off hunger. She followed animal trails through the scrub brush, always alert for signs of danger, both four-legged and two-legged. On the second day, as the sun reached its peak, she crested a ridge and saw Dustrock spread out in the valley below. The town looked like a wound in the earth, hastily built wooden structures surrounded by mining equipment, waste piles and corrals filled with horses and mules. Smoke rose from chimneys and forge fires, and even from a distance she could hear the sounds of men shouting, hammers ringing, and the general chaos of a frontier boom town. Aiyana's stomach clenched with fear and hunger in equal measure. She had no choice now but to descend into that alien world and hope her beadwork would buy her another day of life. She whispered a prayer to her ancestors, touched the turquoise necklace at her throat for courage, and began her descent toward an uncertain future. Behind her, the canyon lands of her childhood shimmered in the heat like a mirage, already feeling like another lifetime. In Dustrock below, her destiny awaited, though she could never have imagined it would come in the form of a broken-down mule and an act of compassion that would change everything. The stench hit Aiyana first, a mixture of unwashed bodies, horse manure, rotting food, and the acrid smoke from the smelting operations. Dustrock assaulted her senses like a physical blow as she walked down the main street, clutching her bundle of beadwork against her chest. The wooden buildings seemed to lean into each other drunkenly, their facades weathered and bullet-scarred from countless frontier disputes. Men stopped their conversations to stare as she passed. Their eyes held a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and something darker that made Aiyana's skin crawl. She had braided her long black hair tightly and worn her plainest dress, hoping to draw less attention, but her Apache features marked her as clearly as if she carried a flag, announcing her heritage. "Well, I'll be damned," drawled a voice from the saloon porch. "Look what the desert wind blew in." Aiyana kept walking, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. "When surrounded by wolves, little hawk, do not run. Walk with purpose, and they will think you belong to a larger pack." The town square opened before her, dominated by a large wooden platform that served as both auction block and gallows, depending on the day's business. Around its edges, makeshift stalls displayed everything from mining equipment to bottles of patent medicine. This was Dustrock's market, crude, chaotic, but her only hope for survival. Aiyana approached a weathered woman selling fabric scraps and cheap jewelry from a blanket spread on the ground. The woman looked up with sharp blue eyes set in a face like cracked leather. "You sellin' or buyin', girl?" "Selling," Aiyana replied, her voice steadier than she felt. She knelt and carefully unwrapped her beadwork pieces, the bracelet, the decorated pouch, and a small hair ornament she had finished during her journey. The woman picked up the bracelet, examining the intricate pattern with a practiced eye. Despite herself, Aiyana felt a flutter of pride. The work was beautiful, each bead perfectly placed, the colors flowing like water across the leather base. "Apache work," the woman said, not a question but a statement. "Pretty enough. I'll give you 50 cents for the lot." Aiyana's heart sank. 50 cents would barely buy her a meal, let alone the supplies she needed to survive. But before she could respond, a new voice cut through the market noise. "Those pieces are worth 10 times that, Martha. And you know it." A tall man approached, his weathered face kind beneath a battered hat. He wore the dusty clothes of a ranch hand, but something in his bearing suggested he was more than a simple cowboy. "Mind your own business, Sam," Martha snapped. "I'm making the girl a fair offer." Sam knelt beside Aiyana, studying her work with genuine appreciation. "Miss, this beadwork is museum quality. Don't let anyone tell you different." He looked up at her with grey eyes that held no malice, only respect. "You're new to trading in town, aren't you?" Aiyana nodded, uncertain whether to trust this unexpected ally. "Sam Rodriguez," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I run a small ranch north of here. Been trading with Apache craftspeople for years. Always fair, always honest." "Aiyana," she replied softly, shaking his hand. "Beautiful name. Means eternal blossom, doesn't it?" When she looked surprised, Sam smiled. "I've lived in this territory long enough to learn a few things. Your work deserves better than Martha's lowball offers." "Now, see here," Martha began, but Sam held up a hand. "How about this, Miss Aiyana? I'll give you $5 for all 3 pieces, and I'll introduce you to Mrs. Henderson at the general store. She appreciates fine craftsmanship and pays accordingly." $5 was more money than Aiyana had ever held at once. She looked between Sam's honest face and Martha's scowling one, then carefully rewrapped 2 of her pieces, handing only the hair ornament to Sam. $2 for this one," she said firmly. "I need to save the others for better opportunities." Sam's grin was approving. "Smart business sense. You'll do well here if you keep your wits about you." He handed her $2 silver, more wealth than she had imagined possible. "Thank you," Aiyana said, the words carrying more gratitude than simple politeness. "Don't thank me yet. Dustrock can be hard on newcomers, especially," he paused delicately, "especially Apache women," Aiyana finished. "Especially people who don't know the unwritten rules. Stay out of the Golden Nugget Saloon after dark. Avoid the mining camps when the men are drinking their pay, and never show fear. Predators can smell it from a mile away." As if summoned by his words, a commotion erupted from the direction of the livestock corral. Shouts and curses filled the air, punctuated by the sharp crack of a whip. Aiyana instinctively turned toward the sound, her heart clenching at the obvious distress of some animal. Hell," Sam muttered. "Looks like the Morrison boys are having another go at that old mule." Through the crowd of onlookers, Aiyana caught glimpses of what was happening. 3 men, clearly drunk despite the early hour, had cornered an ancient mule against the corral fence. The animal was a pitiful sight, ribs showing through a coat, dulled by neglect, old scars crisscrossing her hide, one ear torn and misshapen. She stood with her head lowered, accepting the blows from a heavy rope with the defeated resignation of a creature who had learned that resistance only brought more pain. "Get up, you worthless bag of bones," shouted one of the men, a red-faced brute with arms like tree trunks. "I paid good money for you, and by God you'll earn your keep." The mule tried to move, stumbled and nearly fell. Her legs shook with exhaustion or illness, perhaps both. The crowd laughed as she struggled to regain her footing. "Someone should stop them," Aiyana whispered, her hands clenched into fists. Sam shook his head grimly. "That's Bull Morrison and his brothers. Nobody crosses them, unless they're looking for a fight. That mule's probably beyond help anyway. Looks half dead already." But Aiyana wasn't listening anymore. She was remembering another time, another place, when she had been the one cowering while angry voices decided her fate. She remembered the helpless rage of being treated as property, valued only for what service she could provide. The mule's dark eyes met hers across the crowd, and Aiyana saw something that made her heart stop. not defeat, but a spark of defiant spirit buried deep beneath layers of suffering. It was the same spark she had felt when standing before the tribal council, refusing to surrender her right to choose her own path. Before she could think, before fear could stop her, Aiyana was pushing through the crowd. Sam called her name, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. All she could see was the mule. All she could feel was the kinship of two beings who had been broken by those who claimed to own them. "Stop," she said, her voice cutting through the jeers and laughter like a blade. The crowd fell silent. Bull Morrison turned, his rope still raised, and stared at the young Apache woman who had dared to challenge him. "What did you say, squaw?" The word hit Aiyana like a slap, but she held her ground. "I said stop. You're hurting her." Bull's laughter was ugly, echoed by his brothers and several onlookers. "Well, ain't that sweet? The savage wants to save the mule." He raised the rope again. "Tell you what, girl, you mind your own business or you can share her fate." The mule lifted her head, looking directly at Aiyana. In that moment, a connection formed, wordless, profound, and unbreakable. Two outcasts recognizing each other across the barriers of species and circumstance. Aiyana stepped forward, placing herself between the mule and the rope. "How much do you want for her?" The crowd buzzed with amazement. Bull Morrison's face darkened with anger. "She ain't for sale. She's mine to do with as I please." "Everything's for sale," Aiyana replied, her voice growing stronger. She pulled out one of her silver dollars, holding it up so the sun caught its shine. $2. $2 for that broken-down bag of bones?" Someone in the crowd called out. "Hell, she ain't worth 2 cents." But Bull Morrison's eyes had fixed on the silver coin. $2 was more than he had paid for the mule, and probably more than he would make from her in a month of hard labor. "Make it 5, he said greedily. Aiyana's heart sank. She only had $2, and she needed supplies to survive. But looking at the mule's trusting eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. "I have $2 now," she said firmly, "and I can get you 3 more by tomorrow. But I take her now, or no deal." Bull considered this, his alcohol-fogged brain working slowly. Around them the crowd held its breath, sensing they were witnessing something significant, though they couldn't have said what. Finally Bull spat in the dust and held out his meaty hand. "Deal, but if you don't have my money by tomorrow sundown, I take her back, and you with her." Aiyana placed the 2 silver dollars in his palm, sealing a bargain that would change both their lives forever. As Bull and his brothers swaggered away, counting their unexpected profit, she turned to face the mule who was now, somehow, hers. "Hello, girl," she whispered, extending her hand slowly. "You come with me now." The mule stood perfectly still as Aiyana approached, her dark eyes wary but no longer filled with the terror that had been there moments before. Up close, the animal's condition was even worse than Aiyana had realized. Her coat was matted and dull, her ribs clearly visible beneath skin marked by countless scars. A deep cut on her left flank looked infected, and she favored her right rear leg as if it pained her. "Easy, girl," Aiyana whispered, her voice soft and musical in the Apache tongue. "No one will hurt you now." The mule's ears twitched forward at the gentle sound, and slowly, carefully, she extended her gray muzzle toward Aiyana's outstretched hand. The touch was feather-light, tentative, as if she expected to be struck at any moment. "What's her name?" Aiyana asked Sam, who had followed her through the dispersing crowd. Sam shook his head grimly. Bull Morrison called her nothing but curses and worthless. "Don't think she's ever had a proper name." Aiyana's heart clenched. Even the most humble Apache pony had a name, a recognition of its spirit and individuality. To be nameless was to be truly nobody. "Then I will give you one," she said to the mule, switching back to English. As her fingers gently stroked the animal's neck, a name came to her as naturally as breathing. Esperanza. It means hope. The mule, Esperanza, seemed to understand. She took a small step closer, her muzzle now resting trustingly in Aiyana's palm. For the first time since leaving her tribe, Aiyana felt a spark of joy pierce through her despair. "Miss Aiyana," Sam said quietly, "I don't want to spoil this moment, but you've got yourself into quite a predicament. Bull Morrison isn't known for his patience or his mercy." The reality crashed back over her like a cold wave. She had $3 to earn by tomorrow's sundown, or face consequences she couldn't even imagine. With no home, no family, and now a sick mule depending on her, the task seemed impossible. "There might be a way," Sam continued, reading her expression. "Mrs. Henderson at the general store, like I mentioned. She's got a good heart and an eye for quality work. If anyone in this town would pay fair prices for your beadwork, it's her. And if she doesn't want them—" Sam was quiet for a moment, then straightened his shoulders with decision. "Then I'll make up the difference myself. What you did here today took courage, and courage deserves to be rewarded, not punished." Aiyana looked at this stranger who had already shown her more kindness than her own family had in her final days with the tribe. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Maybe not," Sam replied with a slight smile, "but I know what I saw. Most folks in this town would have walked past that beating without a second thought. You risked your own safety for a creature that couldn't defend herself. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." As if understanding the conversation, Esperanza nuzzled Aiyana's shoulder, leaving a streak of dust on her dress. Despite everything, Aiyana found herself smiling. "First things first," Sam said practically. "That mule needs water, food, and medical attention. My ranch is only a few miles north of town. You're both welcome to stay there tonight." The offer was tempting, but Aiyana shook her head. "I can't leave town. Bull Morrison might think I'm trying to escape with his money. Then we'll set up camp just outside Dustrock, close enough to show you're not running, far enough to give you both some peace." An hour later they had established a simple camp beside a creek that ran behind the town's outskirts. Sam had provided grain for Esperanza and supplies for Aiyana, refusing any payment. "Consider it an investment in tomorrow's success," he said when she protested. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Aiyana sat beside the creek and gently cleaned Esperanza's wound. The mule stood patiently, occasionally turning her head to watch Aiyana's careful work. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, and something else, a growing trust, that warmed Aiyana's heart like sunrise. "You've had a hard life, haven't you, girl?" Aiyana murmured as she applied a poultice of crushed herbs to the infected cut. Her grandmother had taught her the healing properties of desert plants, knowledge that proved valuable even here. "But that's behind you now. We'll take care of each other." Esperanza's response was to rest her head against Aiyana's shoulder, a gesture so trusting and affectionate that tears sprang to the young woman's eyes. When had she last felt needed, valued love? As darkness fell, Aiyana built a small fire and settled down to work on more beadwork by its flickering light. Her fingers moved with practiced skill, creating patterns that told stories: the journey of the eagle, the wisdom of the bear, the endurance of the desert road. Each bead was placed with intention, each design flowing from her heart through her hands. Esperanza lay down nearby, close enough that Aiyana could feel the warmth of her body. The mule's breathing gradually deepened into the rhythm of peaceful sleep, something she probably hadn't experienced in years. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Aiyana whispered to her sleeping companion. Two outcasts with nowhere to go and no one to depend on, but each other. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. The sound reminded Aiyana painfully of home, but for the first time since her exile, she didn't feel completely alone. Esperanza stirred in her sleep, as if sensing her new friend's momentary sadness, and Aiyana reached out to stroke the mule's neck. "It's all right, girl. We'll figure this out together." Dawn came too quickly, bringing with it the weight of the day's challenge. Aiyana woke to find Esperanza standing over her protectively, ears alert for any sign of danger. The mule looked better already, her eyes brighter, her posture more confident. A good night's rest and kind treatment had begun the healing process. After a simple breakfast of jerky and creek water, they walked back into Dustrock. The town was already bustling with activity as miners prepared for another day underground and merchants opened their shops. Aiyana had completed 2 more pieces of beadwork during her vigil by the fire. A belt decorated with Thunderbird symbols and a hairband featuring the morning star pattern. Henderson's general store occupied a prime corner of Main Street, its windows displaying everything from bolts of fabric to cast-iron pans. A small bell chimed as Aiyana pushed open the door. Esperanza waiting patiently outside. The woman behind the counter looked up from her ledger book. Margaret Henderson was perhaps 50 years old, with graying brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and intelligent hazel eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Her dress was simple but well-made, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to running her own business. "Good morning," she said warmly. "You must be the young lady Sam Rodriguez mentioned. He stopped by earlier and told me about your beautiful handiwork." Aiyana felt a surge of gratitude toward Sam for smoothing her path. She unwrapped her bundle on the counter, displaying all her remaining pieces. "I hope something here interests you, ma'am." Mrs. Henderson examined each piece carefully, holding them up to the light streaming through her front window. Her appreciation was genuine, not the calculating assessment of someone looking to make a quick profit. "These are exquisite," she said finally. "The craftsmanship is some of the finest I've ever seen. This Thunderbird belt, in particular, the symbolism is powerful, isn't it? It represents strength in adversity," Aiyana explained. "The Thunderbird rises above the storm." "How appropriate." Mrs. Henderson's smile was knowing. "Sam told me about yesterday's events. That was a brave thing you did. Some might say foolish." "Brave and foolish often look the same from a distance," Mrs. Henderson replied. "It's only up close that you can tell the difference." She gathered up all the pieces. "I'll take everything. $15 for the lot." Aiyana's heart leaped. $15 was more than enough to pay Bull Morrison, with money left over for supplies. "That's very generous. It's fair payment for exceptional work. I have customers who appreciate authentic Apache craftsmanship. They'll pay premium prices for pieces this beautiful." As Mrs. Henderson counted out the money, she continued, "Sam also mentioned you might be looking for ongoing work. I could use a reliable supplier of quality beadwork. Would you be interested in a regular arrangement?" For a moment, Aiyana couldn't speak. The possibility of steady income, of building a life in this harsh place, seemed too good to be true. "Yes, ma'am. Very much." "Excellent. I'll need about 6 pieces a month. Belts, jewelry, decorative items. I can provide materials and pay $4 per piece depending on complexity." $24 a month. Aiyana had never imagined such wealth. With that income she could afford proper shelter, food, medical supplies for Esperanza, and even begin to save for the future. "There's one condition," Mrs. Henderson added. "I need a reliable supplier, which means you need a permanent address. Sam mentioned you were camping outside town. That won't do for the long term." Aiyana's elation dimmed slightly. "I understand. I'll find something. Actually, I have a suggestion. Behind the store is a small cabin that belonged to my late husband's brother. It's not much, just 2 rooms and a lean-to stable, but it's sound and private. You could rent it for $5 a month if it suits your needs. A home, a real home, with walls and a roof and a place for Esperanza." Aiyana felt tears threaten again, but this time they were tears of hope rather than despair. "I'd like to see it, please." The cabin was perfect, small but clean, with a stone fireplace, a window facing east toward the sunrise, and best of all, a sturdy lean-to where Esperanza could shelter from weather and rest safely. It was more than Aiyana had dared to dream. "I'll take it," she said firmly. "When can we move in?" "Today, if you like. Consider the first month paid in advance as part of our business arrangement." Walking back outside with $15 in her pocket and a future full of possibilities, Aiyana found Esperanza exactly where she had left her, standing patiently in the morning sun. The mule's ears perked up at her approach, and Aiyana could swear she saw happiness in those dark eyes. "Come on, girl," she said, scratching behind Esperanza's good ear. "Let's go settle our debt, and then I'll show you our new home." For the first time since leaving her tribe, Aiyana felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The Golden Nugget Saloon stood like a festering wound in the heart of Dustrock, its bat-wing doors constantly swinging as miners and cowboys stumbled in and out. The stench of stale beer, tobacco and unwashed bodies wafted into the street, mixing with the sound of raucous laughter and the occasional crash of breaking glass. It was barely noon, but already the establishment was doing a thriving business. Aiyana stood across the street, Esperanza beside her, steeling herself for what lay ahead. In her hand, she clutched the $5 that would free them both from Bull Morrison's threat. The money felt heavy, not just in weight but in significance. It represented her first real victory in this new life. "You don't have to go in there," Sam said quietly. He had insisted on accompanying her, despite her protests that she could handle Morrison alone. "I could deliver the money for you." Aiyana shook her head firmly. "This is something I need to do myself. He made the bargain with me, not you." The truth was deeper than that, though she couldn't fully explain it to Sam. Bull Morrison represented every man who had ever tried to control her, from her father to the tribal council members who had voted for her exile. Paying him directly, looking him in the eye as an equal, was important for reasons that went beyond mere money. "At least let me wait outside with Esperanza," Sam offered. "That place isn't safe for anyone with sense, let alone a young Apache woman." Aiyana agreed to this compromise, though every instinct told her that Esperanza would be safer with her than left outside where Morrison's brothers might see her. She stroked the mule's neck reassuringly. "I'll be back soon, girl. Stay close to Sam." Esperanza nuzzled her shoulder, as if sensing her anxiety. The mule's faith in her gave Aiyana courage as she pushed through the saloon's bat-wing doors. The inside of the Golden Nugget was even worse than she had imagined. Smoke hung thick in the air, making her eyes water. The floor was sticky with spilled drinks and worse things she preferred not to identify. Card games occupied several tables, with piles of coins and crumpled bills changing hands as fortunes rose and fell. At the bar, men hunched over whiskey glasses like vultures over carrion. Bull Morrison sat at a corner table with his two brothers, Jake and Pete, all three working steadily through a bottle of rot-gut whiskey. Bull's face was already flushed red from alcohol, his small pig-like eyes glassy and unfocused. When he spotted Aiyana, a cruel grin spread across his meaty features. "Well, well," he bellowed, loud enough to draw attention from half the saloon. "Look what we got here, boys." The little squaw came to pay her debts. The word hit Aiyana like a physical blow, just as it had the day before, but she forced herself not to react. She walked steadily toward Morrison's table, aware that every eye in the place was now fixed on her. Conversations had died to whispers, and she could feel the weight of hostile curiosity pressing down on her shoulders. "I have your money," she said simply, placing the $5 silver on the scarred wooden table. Bull stared at the coins for a moment, as if surprised that she had actually managed to acquire them. Then his expression shifted to something uglier, disappointment mixed with malice. "Well, ain't that something?" he said slowly, making no move to take the money. The savage actually came through. "Our business is concluded then," Aiyana replied, turning to leave. "Hold on there, girl." Bull's voice cracked like a whip. "I don't recall saying we were done." Aiyana turned back, her heart sinking as she recognized the look in Morrison's eyes. She had seen it before, in men who enjoyed causing pain for its own sake. The money had never been the real issue. He had been hoping she would fail so he could collect a different kind of payment. "You paid for the mule," Bull continued, his brothers grinning beside him like jackals. "But you ain't paid for the trouble you caused me yesterday. Made me look bad in front of half the town interfering in my business like that." "What kind of trouble?" Aiyana asked, though she already knew this was a trap. Public humiliation, Bull said, savoring each syllable. Damage to my reputation. That's worth at least another $10, wouldn't you say, boys? Jake and Pete nodded eagerly, their hands resting meaningfully on the gun butts at their hips. Around the saloon, other patrons watched with the fascination of people witnessing a dogfight. Aiyana felt the familiar rage building in her chest, the same fury that had driven her to defy her father and the tribal council. But this time she forced herself to think. Before speaking, she was alone in hostile territory, outnumbered and outgunned. Raw courage wouldn't be enough here. I don't have $10 more, she said quietly. That's a real shame, Bull replied, rising from his chair. He was even larger than she remembered, his massive frame blocking out the light from the grimy window behind him. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to work out alternative arrangements. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Around the saloon, men shifted in their seats, some looking uncomfortable, but none willing to interfere. This was Morrison's territory, and everyone knew it. What kind of arrangements? Aiyana asked, though she dreaded the answer. Bull's grin revealed teeth stained brown with tobacco. Well now, a pretty little thing like you could work off that debt real easy. Couple hours upstairs, and we'll call it even. The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. Aiyana felt bile rise in her throat, but she kept her expression calm. She had expected this. It was the same degradation that powerful men had always tried to inflict on women they saw as property. No, she said simply. Bull's face darkened. That wasn't a request, squaw. And that wasn't a debt. A new voice cut through the tension like a blade. Every head turned toward the saloon's entrance, where a figure stood silhouetted against the bright desert sun. As the man stepped forward into the smoky interior, Aiyana felt her heart stop. He was Apache, perhaps 40 years old, with long black hair streaked with silver and traditional clothing that somehow looked natural, even in this alien environment. His face was weathered and stern, with the kind of quiet dignity that came from absolute confidence in one's place in the world. Most unnervingly of all, his dark eyes held a recognition that made Aiyana's blood run cold. Nalnish, the man said, speaking her father's name in perfect Apache. Your daughter has more courage than wisdom, it seems. Aiyana's world tilted sideways. This stranger knew her father, knew her identity, had somehow found her in this god-forsaken place. The implications crashed over her like an avalanche. Who the hell are you? Bull Morrison demanded, his hand moving toward his gun. The Apache man's gaze shifted to Morrison with the kind of cold assessment a hunter gives potential prey. I am Hasia of the Chiricahua Apache. And you, fat man, have made a serious mistake. This ain't your fight, Chief, Bull snarled. The squaw owes me money. She owes you nothing, Hasia replied calmly. Your original bargain was $2 for the mule, 3 more to be paid by sunset today. She has fulfilled her obligation. I decide what she owes. No, Hasia said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. You do not. In one fluid motion, he drew a knife from his belt, not the crude blade of a frontier brawler, but a beautifully crafted weapon that gleamed like silver in the dim light. The movement was so fast, so graceful, that several men gasped audibly. The girl is under my protection now, Hasia continued, never taking his eyes off Morrison. Any man who threatens her threatens the Chiricahua nation. Do you understand the consequences of that threat, fat man? Bull Morrison was many things, but he wasn't completely stupid. Apache warriors had a fearsome reputation throughout the territory, and the last thing he wanted was to bring down the wrath of an entire tribe on Dustrock. Fine, he muttered, scooping up the $5 from the table. Take your squaw and get out. But if I see either of you in my town again, you will treat them with the respect due to all beings. Hasia finished coldly, or you will answer to me. The threat was clear and absolute. Morrison might terrorize drunken miners and helpless animals, but he was no match for an Apache warrior, and everyone in the saloon knew it. Aiyana stood frozen as Hesea gestured toward the door. "Come, Aiyana. We have much to discuss." Outside, Sam was waiting nervously with Esperanza, clearly having heard the raised voices from within. His relief was visible when he saw both Aiyana and the mysterious Apache emerge unharmed. "Miss Aiyana, are you all right?" Sam asked anxiously. She nodded, though nothing felt all right. The appearance of Hesea had shattered her newfound sense of security. If he could find her, who else might come looking? "Sam Rodriguez," Hesea said, somehow knowing the rancher's name without introduction. "Your kindness to Nalnish's daughter has not gone unnoticed. You know my father." Aiyana finally found her voice. Hesea's stern expression softened slightly. "I know many things, little sister, including why you were cast out and why you chose to save this broken mule rather than preserve yourself." He reached out and gently touched Esperanza's nose, and the mule stood perfectly still for him. "Your grandmother would be proud of the woman you have become." At the mention of her grandmother, tears sprang to Aiyana's eyes. "What do you want from me?" "To talk," Hesea replied simply. "To offer you choices you did not know you had. But first, let us see this new home I hear you have found." As they walked toward Mrs. Henderson's store, Aiyana's mind raced with questions. How had Hesea found her? What did he want? And most importantly, would this unexpected intervention destroy the fragile new life she had just begun to build? Beside her, Esperanza walked with her head high, as if the mule too sensed that their story was about to take another dramatic turn. The small cabin behind Henderson's general store had never felt so cramped as it did with Hesea's imposing presence filling the space. The Apache warrior sat cross-legged on the floor in the traditional way, his weathered hands resting calmly on his knees as he watched Aiyana tend to Esperanza in the lean-to stable. Through the open doorway, late afternoon sunlight painted golden rectangles across the rough wooden floor. Sam had reluctantly taken his leave after Hesea assured him that Aiyana was safe. "I'll be at my ranch if you need anything," Sam had said quietly, his concern evident. "Just remember you've got friends here now." Now, alone with this mysterious warrior who seemed to know so much about her life, Aiyana felt the weight of unspoken questions pressing down like storm clouds. She finished brushing Esperanza's coat and checking the mule's healing wounds before finally turning to face her unexpected visitor. "You knew my grandmother," she said. "It wasn't a question." Hesea nodded slowly. "Itzel was my sister." The revelation hit Aiyana like a physical blow. She had never known her grandmother had any living siblings. As far as she knew, Itzel had been the last of her line, which was part of what made Aiyana's exile so devastating. She was losing not just her family, but her entire heritage. "That makes you my great-uncle," Aiyana whispered, sinking onto a wooden crate that served as her only chair. "In blood, yes. In spirit, I have been watching over you since the day you were born." Hesea's dark eyes held depths of sorrow and pride in equal measure. "Your grandmother spoke of you often in her letters." "Letters?" Aiyana felt dizzy. "What letters?" "Did you think Itzel lived her entire life within your father's tribe? She was Chiricahua-Hapshi, like me. When she married your grandfather and joined the Mescalero, she never forgot her true family." Hesea reached into a leather pouch at his side and withdrew a bundle of papers tied with sinew. "She wrote to me for 30 years, telling me of her life, her son who became chief, and most especially her granddaughter, who had the heart of a warrior and the spirit of a free eagle." Aiyana stared at the letters, her hands trembling as she reached for them. Her grandmother's familiar handwriting covered page after page, filled with Apache words and phrases that spoke of love, worry, hope, and fierce pride. In letter after letter, Itzel had chronicled Aiyana's growth from child to woman, celebrating her granddaughter's independence and lamenting the growing tension with her father. She knew Aiyana breathed, scanning the most recent letter. She knew father would try to force me into marriage. She knew I would resist. Itzel was wise in the ways of hearts, Hesea confirmed. She also knew that your father, for all his strength as a leader, could be blind to the changing world. He saw your defiance as disobedience, but she saw it as the natural evolution of our people. Evolution. Aiyana looked up from the letters, confusion clouding her features. Hesea was quiet for a long moment, his gaze turning toward the window, where the desert landscape stretched endlessly under the darkening sky. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of prophecy. The old ways are dying, Aiyana, not because they are wrong, but because the world they were built for no longer exists. Your father clings to traditions that once kept our people strong, but now those same traditions may destroy us. The white man's influence grows stronger every day. Soon, our children will need to walk in both worlds, Apache, in their hearts, but able to survive in the white man's society. What does that have to do with me? Everything. Hesea stood and moved to the window, his silhouette sharp against the dying light. You are the bridge between worlds, little sister, Apache enough to understand our ways, strong enough to forge new ones. Your grandmother saw this in you before you could walk. Aiyana felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was suggesting. I'm exiled, cast out. I have no tribe, no family, no place in either world. You have me, Hesea said simply. And through me you have the Cherokee, your grandmother's people, your people. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning swimmer. For a moment, Aiyana allowed herself to imagine it, returning to tribal life, but with a people who might understand her need for independence, who might value her strength rather than see it as defiance. But then Esperanza whinnied softly from her stall, and reality crashed back. She looked through the doorway at the mule who had already begun to thrive under her care, at the small cabin that represented the first home she had ever chosen for herself, at the life she was building with her own hands and heart. I can't, she said quietly. Hesea turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Why? Because this is where I belong now. Not because someone told me I belonged here, but because I chose it. She gestured toward Esperanza. She needs me. I made her a promise when I bought her freedom, that no one would hurt her again. If I leave, what happens to her? She's just a mule, Aiyana. No, the word came out sharper than she intended. She's my friend, my family. The first being to trust me since grandmother died. Aiyana's voice grew stronger as she spoke. You say I'm a bridge between worlds, but maybe the bridge isn't between Apache and white. Maybe it's between all living things that suffer, all beings that are cast aside and forgotten. Hesea studied her for a long moment, then slowly smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him. Itzel always said you would surprise everyone, including yourself. Does that mean you understand? I understand that you are more your grandmother's granddaughter than even she knew. He reached into his pouch again and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft deskin. She wanted you to have this, whether you came with me or chose your own path. Aiyana unwrapped the gift with reverent hands. Inside was a silver bracelet, intricately worked with Apache symbols, but in a style she had never seen before. The metal seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, and the symbols were arranged in patterns that spoke of journeys, transformations, and new beginnings. She made this herself? Aiyana asked, awed by the craftsmanship. With her own hands during the last months of her life, she said it was meant for the woman you would become, not the girl you were. Hesea's voice grew soft with memory. She also said that if you chose to stay in the white man's world, you would need something to remind you that you carry Apache wisdom wherever you go. Aiyana fastened the bracelet around her wrist, feeling its weight like a blessing. It was beautiful, but more than that it felt right, as if it had always belonged there. There's something else, Hesea continued, a proposal that might interest you. What kind of proposal? The territorial government is looking for intermediaries, people who can work between Apache tribes and white settlements to prevent conflicts. The work would be dangerous, and it would require someone who understands both cultures deeply. He paused significantly. Someone like you. Aiyana's heart raced. The possibility of such work had never occurred to her, but it felt like a calling she had been unconsciously preparing for her entire life. The pay would be good, Aiyana continued. Enough to support yourself and your mule comfortably. More importantly, you would be helping to build the bridge you spoke of, preventing the kind of misunderstandings that lead to bloodshed on both sides. How would it work? You would remain here in Dustrock as your base. When tensions arise between Apache groups and white settlements, you would travel to mediate. Your knowledge of both languages, both ways of thinking, would be invaluable. It was everything Aiyana had dreamed of without knowing she was dreaming. Meaningful work that honored both sides of her heritage, financial independence, and the ability to keep her promise to Esperanza. When would this begin? Immediately, if you There's already a situation brewing near Fort Apache that requires delicate handling. Aiyana pulled out an official-looking document. The territorial governor himself signed this authorization. You would be the first Apache woman to hold such a position. Aiyana stared at the paper, hardly daring to believe that such an opportunity could be real. Then she looked at Esperanza, who had wandered closer to listen to their conversation with the intelligent attention that never ceased to amaze her. "What do you think, girl? Ready to see more of this territory?" Esperanza's soft whinny sounded almost like agreement, and for the first time since Aiyana's arrival, Aiyana felt the tight knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. "I accept," she said firmly, "on one condition. Name it." "Esperanza comes with me on every assignment. She's not just my companion, she's my partner." Aiyana looked at the mule with new respect, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Your grandmother always said that the spirits speak through many voices. Perhaps they chose to speak through 4 legs as well as 2. As night fell over Dustrock, Aiyana sat by her small fire, with her great-uncle beside her, reading her grandmother's letters by flickering light, while Esperanza dozed peacefully nearby. For the first time since her exile, she felt truly connected to her past while looking forward to her future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new journeys, and new opportunities to build bridges between divided worlds. But tonight, surrounded by the love of ancestors and the trust of a friend, Aiyana felt complete. The outcast had found her calling, and it was greater than she had ever dared to imagine. 3 weeks later, Aiyana sat astride Esperanza, on a ridge overlooking the San Carlos Apache reservation, her heart heavy with the weight of what lay before them. The government issued papers in her saddlebag designated her as an official territorial mediator, but no amount of official authority could prepare her for the reality of what she was seeing. The reservation stretched below like an open wound in the earth, a collection of canvas tents and crude wooden structures housing nearly 4,000 Apache people from different tribes, all forced together on land that could barely support half that number. The San Carlos River ran brown with silt, and even from this distance, she could see the signs of malnutrition and despair that marked too many faces. "It's worse than I imagined," she murmured to Esperanza, who stood perfectly still as her rider absorbed the heartbreaking scene. The mule had transformed completely over the past weeks. Regular food, clean water, and loving care had restored her coat to a glossy brown, filled out her frame, and brought a bright intelligence to her eyes that made her seem almost human in her understanding. More importantly, the bond between them had deepened into something that transcended the usual relationship between human and animal. They communicated through subtle shifts in posture, shared glances, and an intuitive understanding that bordered on the mystical. "Come on, girl, we have work to do." They rode down the winding trail toward the reservation's administrative center, where Agent Crawford waited with what he had described in his telegram as a delicate situation requiring immediate attention. Aiyana had learned enough about government bureaucrats to know that delicate usually meant explosive, and immediate attention meant we should have dealt with this months ago. The administrative building was a stark wooden structure that looked like it had been thrown together by someone who had never seen the desert before. Its unpainted walls were already warping in the heat, and the tin roof radiated waves of furnace-like air that made the surrounding area feel like an oven. Agent Crawford emerged as she approached, a thin, nervous man in his 40s, with the pale complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors and the worried expression of someone perpetually overwhelmed by his responsibility. His suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat, despite the early hour. "Miss Martinez, thank God you're here," he began, then stopped and stared. "You're younger than I expected, and you're more desperate than you sounded in your telegram." Aiyana replied evenly, dismounting from Esperanza. She had decided to use her mother's maiden name, Martinez, in official correspondence to avoid complications. "What exactly is the situation?" Crawford glanced nervously around the compound before beckoning her toward his office. "It's the water rights dispute. The white ranchers upstream have been diverting more and more of the San Carlos River for their cattle. The Apache are saying their children are going thirsty while white cows drink their fill." "Are the children going thirsty?" "Well, yes, but the legal situation is complex. The ranchers have prior claims dating back to territorial land grants, and technically, Agent Crawford," Aiyana interrupted. "I didn't ask for a legal lecture. I asked a simple question. Are Apache children going thirsty so that cattle can drink?" Crawford's face flushed red. "The situation is more nuanced than that. The situation is exactly that simple." Aiyana's voice carried the quiet authority she had learned from watching her grandmother deal with difficult people. "Now what do you want me to do about it?" "The Apache leaders are threatening to take action themselves if the government doesn't intervene. Chief Esperanza specifically mentioned that his warriors are prepared to dam the river upstream from the ranches if necessary." Aiyana felt a chill despite the desert heat. Apache warriors attempting to sabotage white-owned water systems would bring down the full force of the territorial militia, leading to bloodshed that could escalate into another Indian war. "When is the next scheduled meeting with the ranchers?" "That's the problem. They've refused to meet with us. Say they don't negotiate with government Indian lovers and that their lawyers in Tucson will handle any legal challenges. Then we'll have to be more persuasive." Crawford looked skeptical. "Miss Martinez, these are hard men who've been fighting Apache raids for 20 years. They're not going to listen to a young woman, especially one who—" He stopped himself, but the implication was clear. "Especially one who looks Apache." Aiyana finished coldly. "I didn't mean to offend, but the practical reality is that I'm the only person here who understands both sides of this conflict well enough to prevent a war. Now where can I find Chief Esperanza?" Crawford provided directions to the chief's lodge, though he continued to express doubts about her ability to handle such a volatile situation. Aiyana left him muttering about the impossibility of his job, and rode deeper into the reservation with Esperanza. The living conditions she observed along the way were even worse than they had appeared from the ridge. Families crowded into shelters that wouldn't adequately house half their number. Children with the distended bellies of malnutrition played listlessly in the dust. Elders sat in whatever shade they could find, their faces bearing the hollow look of people who had lost everything that gave life meaning. But it was the young men who worried Aiyana most. They gathered in small groups, their eyes burning with the frustrated rage of warriors forced into helplessness. She recognized the look. It was the same fury she had felt when the tribal council tried to treat her as property. The difference was that these men had weapons and military training, and their anger was focused on very specific targets. Chief Esperanza's lodge, was one of the few traditional structures on the reservation, built from brush and hide in the old Apache way. The chief himself was a man in his 50s, his weathered face bearing the scars of countless battles and the deeper wounds of watching his people slowly die of despair. When Aiyana approached, he was sitting outside his lodge, carefully working on a piece of traditional beadwork, one of the few crafts the government allowed Apache to practice. Chief Esperanza, I am Aiyana Martinez, sent by the territorial government to discuss the water situation. The chief looked up from his work, studying her face with intelligent dark eyes. You are Apache, Mescalero by birth, Chiricahua by blood, American by choice. Esperanza nodded slowly, as if this explanation made sense to him. And the mule, my partner. Her name is Esperanza. Something in the way she said it, with absolute matter-of-factness, seemed to amuse the chief. A mule for a partner. There is wisdom in that. Mules are stubborn enough to survive anything. So are Apache women, Aiyana replied. This earned her a genuine smile. Sit, daughter. Tell me why I should trust the government's promises when they have broken every treaty they ever made with my people. Aiyana dismounted and sat cross-legged in the traditional way, accepting the implicit invitation to speak as one Apache to another, rather than as a government representative. Because I'm not asking you to trust the government's promises, uncle. I'm asking you to trust mine. And what do you promise? That your children will have water, that the white ranchers will reduce their diversions to sustainable levels, that this will happen without bloodshed. Esperanza set aside his beadwork and leaned forward intently. How? By making the ranchers understand that their long-term survival depends on cooperation, not conquest. They will not listen to words. They understand only force. Then we'll speak to them, in the language they understand, but not the way they expect. Over the next hour, Aiyana laid out her plan. It was audacious, potentially dangerous, and completely unprecedented, but it just might work. Esperanza listened without interruption, occasionally asking pointed questions that showed his tactical mind was fully engaged. It could succeed, he admitted finally, but if it fails, the consequences will fall heavily on my people. If we do nothing, the consequences will be even heavier. Your warriors are ready to dam that river, aren't they? Esperanza's silence was answer enough. Uncle, I know the anger your young men feel. I've felt it myself, but anger without strategy is just destruction. Give me 3 days to try my way. If it doesn't work, I won't stand in the way of yours. The chief was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant as he weighed options that all carried terrible risks. Finally he nodded. 3 days, but understand, daughter, if your plan fails, many good people may die. Can you carry that weight? Aiyana thought of Esperanza, beaten and broken until someone cared enough to intervene. She thought of the Apache children playing in the dust while their livestock grew thirsty. She thought of her grandmother's letters, full of hope that her granddaughter would help bridge the gap between worlds. I can carry it, uncle. The question is whether I can lift it. The next morning, Aiyana and Esperanza rode out toward the Rocking Mem Ranch, the largest of the operations diverting water from the San Carlos River. Behind them, hidden in the rough country along the river, 20 of Esperanza's most trusted warriors waited for her signal. Ahead lay a confrontation that would either prevent a war or start one. The plan was simple in concept, but complex in execution. Aiyana would approach the ranchers not as a government mediator, but as a successful businesswoman with a proposition that could make them all wealthy. The key was making them believe that cooperation would be more profitable than conflict. As they crested a hill and saw the sprawling ranch complex below, Esperanza snorted softly, as if sensing her rider's tension. I know, girl, this could go very badly, but sometimes the only way forward is through the fire. The mule's ears twitched forward attentively, and Aiyana could swear she saw understanding in those intelligent dark eyes. Together, they rode toward what would be either a diplomatic triumph or a spectacular disaster. The future of two peoples hung in the balance, and everything depended on whether a former outcast and a rescued mule could convince a group of hardened ranchers to see beyond their immediate self-interest to the greater good that lay beyond. The rocking Mia ranch house sat like a fortress in the desert valley, its thick adobe walls and iron-barred windows speaking of a family that had carved their claim from hostile territory through sheer determination and superior firepower. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimney, and the sound of cattle lowing drifted across the compound where dozens of cowboys went about their morning tasks. It was an impressive operation, built on ambition and sustained by the precious water that flowed from the diverted San Carlos River. Aiyana paused at the main gate, studying the scene with tactical eyes. 6 armed men lounged near the bunkhouse, their rifles casually displayed but ready for immediate use. More cowboys worked the corrals, all of them carrying sidearms. This was clearly a ranch that expected trouble and was prepared to meet it with violence. "Easy, girl," she whispered to Esperanza, feeling the mule's muscles tense beneath her. The intelligent animal had learned to read human aggression as well as any warrior, and the hostile atmosphere was making her nervous. The gate guard, a grizzled cowboy with suspicious eyes, stepped forward as they approached. "State your business, lady. I'm here to see Mr. Harrison about a business proposition that could make us all wealthy." "Mr. Harrison don't do business with," the guard began, then stopped himself as he got a closer look at Aiyana. She had dressed carefully for this encounter, wearing a well-tailored riding dress, borrowed from Miss Henderson, and carrying herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding respect. Her Apache features were still unmistakable, but her bearing suggested education and refinement, rather than wild savagery. "With what?" Aiyana prompted calmly. "With folks he don't know," the guard finished awkwardly. "You got an appointment? I have something better. I have an opportunity that won't wait for appointments." Before the guard could respond, a booming voice called out from the ranch house porch, "Let her through, Murphy. Any woman brave enough to ride out here alone deserves to be heard." The man who emerged from the house matched his voice, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating the kind of casual authority that came from owning everything he could see. Thomas Harrison was perhaps 50 years old, with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He wore expensive clothes tailored to fit his powerful frame, and his polished boots clicked against the wooden porch as he descended to meet his unexpected visitor. "Mr. Harrison, I presume," Aiyana said, dismounting gracefully from Esperanza's back. "That's right. And you are?" "Aiyana Martinez, Territorial Water Rights Consultant." The title was completely improvised, but she delivered it with such confidence that it sounded official. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "Never heard of such a position. It's new. The territorial government is finally taking a systematic approach to water management in Apache country." Aiyana reached into her saddlebag and withdrew an official-looking document, actually her mediator credentials, but folded in such a way that only the territorial seal was visible. "I'm here because your operation is about to become either very profitable or very problematic, depending on the choices you make in the next few days." Harrison studied the document, clearly impressed, despite his skepticism. "What kind of problems are we talking about?" "The kind that involve Apache warriors, federal troops, and congressional investigations into territorial water management policies." The rancher's face darkened. "Are you threatening me, Miss Martinez? I'm informing you of realities that are developing whether you acknowledge them or not." Aiyana's voice remained calm and professional. "The Apache at San Carlos are preparing to take direct action against upstream diversions. The territorial government wants to resolve this peacefully, but they're prepared to support whatever resolution emerges." "Let 'em try," Harrison growled. "I got 40 armed men and legal claims dating back 15 years. You also have cattle worth thousands of dollars scattered across grazing land that's impossible to defend. A main house that would burn beautifully if someone wanted it to. And water sources that could be poisoned or diverted by a handful of determined warriors who know this country better than you ever will." Aiyana delivered this assessment with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing the weather. Harrison's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. then stopped as he realized the young woman was simply stating tactical facts, not making threats. On the other hand, Aiyana continued, "You could become the wealthiest rancher in the territory within 5 years if you play this situation correctly." Despite his anger, Harrison's business instincts were too sharp to ignore such a statement. "I'm listening. Water rights are about to become more valuable than gold claims in Arizona territory. The federal government is planning massive irrigation projects, railroad development, and territorial expansion. The ranchers who control water sources, when that development begins, will be the ones who profit from it." This was pure speculation on Aiyana's part, but it was educated speculation based on conversations with territorial officials and her own observations of development patterns. What does this have to do with the Apache situation? Everything. If you fight the Apache, you'll win the battle but lose the war. Federal troops will be stationed here permanently. Congressional committees will investigate your water claims, and you'll spend years in court fighting challenges from every direction. Aiyana paused to let this sink in. But if you resolve this cooperatively, you become the territory's model for successful Indian relations. That means government contracts, preferential treatment on future water rights, and political connections worth their weight in silver. Harrison was clearly intrigued, despite himself. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A partnership. You reduce your water diversions by 30% during the dry season, allowing sufficient flow to the reservation. In exchange, the Apache provide labor for your irrigation projects at fair wages, protection for your cattle from raiders, and political support for your future water rights expansions." "Apache cowboys?" Harrison laughed harshly. "They'd steal me blind or cut my throat in the night." "Some might, but most are desperate for honest work that allows them to feed their families with dignity." Aiyana's voice grew more passionate as she spoke from her heart rather than her strategy. "These are people who understood cattle management before your ancestors left Europe. They're natural horsemen, expert trackers, and completely familiar with desert survival. Train them properly, treat them fairly, and you'll have the most skilled workforce in the territory." Esperanza chose that moment to wander over to the water trough near the porch and begin drinking. The mule's presence seemed to calm the tension in the air, reminding everyone that practical matters like thirst and sustenance transcended the abstract arguments of politics and pride. "That's a fine-looking animal," Harrison observed, studying Esperanza with an experienced eye. "She was half dead when I bought her 3 months ago. Beaten, starved, and worked nearly to death by men who saw her as disposable property." Aiyana stroked the mule's neck affectionately. "With proper care and respect, look what she became." The parallel was obvious, and Harrison was smart enough to understand it. He looked from Esperanza to Aiyana to the official document still in his hand, weighing risks and opportunities with the calculating mind that had built his empire. "I know this is dangerous, girl," she whispered to the mule. "I know I'm asking a lot of you, but people are going to die if we don't try to stop this." Esperanza's response was to nuzzle her shoulder with complete trust, as if to say that wherever Aiyana went, she would follow. Crawford had agreed to ride immediately to Fort Apache to alert the military commanders about the potential conspiracy, while Sam would gather some of his most trusted hands and follow Aiyana's trail in case she needed rescue. But as she rode out into the gathering darkness with only Esperanza for company, Aiyana knew that the success or failure of her mission would ultimately depend on something no amount of preparation could guarantee: the hope that the bonds she had helped forge between former enemies were stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. Behind her, the lights of Sam's ranch faded into the distance. Ahead lay a confrontation that would either save the peace she had worked so hard to build or witness its destruction in blood and fire. The stakes had never been higher, and she had never felt more alone, except for the steady presence of the mule who had chosen to share her destiny. Together they rode toward an uncertain dawn, carrying the fragile hope of two peoples in their heart. In the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their wild songs echoing across the desert like a lament for all the dreams that die in the darkness between hope and despair. Dawn was breaking over the rocking Mule ranch when Aiyana and Esperanza crested the final ridge, and what they saw below made Aiyana's heart sink like a stone in deep water. The ranch was preparing for war. Armed men moved with military precision around defensive positions. Rifles glinted from every window and rooftop, and the peaceful atmosphere she remembered from her first visit had been replaced by the grim efficiency of a fortress under siege. Worse yet, she could see riders approaching from the east, Apache warriors in full war paint, their ponies moving at the steady lope of men riding to battle. Chief Esperanza was bringing his fighters to confront what he believed was Harrison's betrayal of their sacred agreement. "We're too late," Aiyana whispered to Esperanza, her voice breaking with the weight of impending tragedy. "They're going to destroy everything we built." But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Esperanza was moving, not away from the approaching conflict, but directly toward it. The mule's determination sparked something fierce in Aiyana's chest. They had come this far together, had overcome impossible odds through trust and courage. She would not let fear stop her now. "You're right, girl. We didn't come all this way to give up." As they rode down toward the ranch, Aiyana could see Harrison himself standing on the porch of his rebuilt house, his face hard with grief and rage. The sight of the approaching Apache warriors had galvanized his men into defensive positions, and she could feel the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a lightning strike. "Mr. Harrison," she called out as she entered the ranch compound. "Don't do this. You're playing into their hands." Harrison turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes blazing with pain and fury. "Miss Martinez, thank God you're alive. When we heard about the murders, we thought they might have gotten you too." "What murders?" Aiyana asked, though she dreaded the answer. "3 good men, Apache men who trusted me, who worked beside my boys like brothers, shot down like dogs while they were checking cattle." Harrison's voice cracked with emotion. "And they tried to burn me alive in my own house. Is this how the Apache honor their agreements? Thomas, may I call you Thomas? Listen to me carefully. The Apache didn't kill your men. Someone else did. Someone who wants you to believe Esperanza broke faith with you." "I saw the arrows," Harrison snarled. "Apache arrows in their backs. Arrows anyone could have made and planted to lay blame. Think, Thomas. In 6 months of working together, have Esperanza's people ever given you cause to distrust them?" Harrison's certainty wavered slightly. "Well, no, but then why would they throw away everything they've gained? Steady work, fair treatment, water for their children. Why would they destroy all that for the momentary satisfaction of murdering 3 men? Before Harrison could answer, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats announced the arrival of Chief Esperanza and his war party. The Apache leader rode at their head, his face painted with the stark black and white stripes of war, his rifle held ready across his saddle. Behind him came 20 of his finest warriors, all armed and prepared for battle. Aiyana felt her heart break a little more as she saw the transformation in these men she had come to know as farmers and cowboys. War paint had turned them back into the decent fighters of Apache legend, and the rage burning in their eyes promised that this confrontation would end in bloodshed. "Esperanza," Harrison shouted from his porch, "you broke our agreement. You murdered my men." The Apache chief dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and threatening. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold finality of a death sentence. "White man speaks with forked tongue, as always. You kill Apache workers who trusted you, then try to burn Chief's representative in her cabin. But spirits protect Aiyana, and now we come for justice." "Wait," Aiyana said, her mind racing. "Chief, someone tried to kill me." "When?" "Last night. Fire set to cabin behind store in Dustrock. Only luck saved you. You were not there." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Someone had tried to murder both Harrison and Aiyana simultaneously, knowing that their deaths would shatter the peace agreement and plunge the territory into war. Only their absence from their expected locations had saved them. "Don't you see?" Aiyana called out to both men. "Neither of you ordered these killings. Someone else did, someone who wants you to destroy each other." But her words were lost as Harrison's men and Eskiminzan's warriors began moving into combat positions. Years of mutual distrust and racial hatred were overcoming months of careful bridge building. The two groups she had worked so hard to unite were about to tear each other apart. In desperation, Aiyana rode Esperanza directly between the two forces, her voice rising above the sounds of preparation for battle. "Stop! All of you stop!" When neither side showed signs of backing down, she drew her pistol and fired it into the air. The sharp crack of the gunshot echoed off the canyon walls, freezing everyone in place. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice carrying an authority she had never known she possessed. "Look at what you're about to throw away." She gestured toward Harrison's ranch, where Apache and white cowboys had worked side by side in harmony. 6 months ago, this was impossible. Apache and white men sharing the same bunkhouse, eating at the same table, trusting each other with their lives. "You built something beautiful here, something the whole territory looked to as proof that we could be better than our worst impulses." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Thomas, remember the day you shook hands with Eskiminzan at Willow Creek? You told me afterward that for the first time in 20 years you slept peacefully, knowing you had neighbors instead of enemies." Harrison's face softened slightly at the memory, but his grip on his rifle remained firm. "And Chief," Aiyana turned to address Eskiminzan directly in Apache, "remember what you told me when the first Apache cowboys came home with honest wages in their pockets. You said it was the first time since the reservation was created that your men felt like warriors instead of beggars." Eskiminzan's war paint couldn't hide the flicker of pain that crossed his features. Someone murdered those men precisely because they were proof that Apache and white could work together. Aiyana continued, switching back to English so both sides could understand. "Someone tried to kill Thomas and me because we represent everything they fear. The possibility that hatred can be overcome, that trust can be built, that peace is possible." "Who?" Harrison demanded. "Who benefits from our war?" "Anyone who wants Apache land without Apache people on it," Aiyana replied grimly. "Mining companies, railroad interests, land speculators. They've been waiting for an excuse to call for military intervention that would clear out the reservations permanently." She could see understanding dawning in both leaders' eyes, but the warriors and cowboys remained poised for violence. 20 years of conditioning couldn't be overcome by words alone. It was Esperanza who provided the catalyst for peace. The mule, sensing the tension and fear around her, did something she had never done before. She began to move among the armed men, touching each one gently with her muzzle, looking into their eyes with her profound intelligence. There was something almost supernatural about it, as if she understood that her touch could bridge the gap between enemies. One by one, the men began to lower their weapons. An Apache warrior reached out to scratch behind Esperanza's ears, and the simple gesture seemed to drain some of the murder from his painted face. A white cowboy offered her an apple from his saddlebag, and his smile broke through the grimness of the moment like sunrise after a long night. "She remembers what we're fighting for," Aiyana said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "Not revenge or pride or ancient grievances. We're fighting for the chance to live without fear, to build something better for our children, to prove that love is stronger than hatred." Thomas Harrison was the first to holster his weapon completely. "Miss Martinez, Aiyana, you're right. I let grief and anger cloud my judgment. But what do we do now? How do we find who's really responsible?" Before she could answer, the sound of approaching riders came from the canyon mouth. A large group was approaching fast. Too fast for peaceful intentions. Both Apache and white men immediately reached for their weapons again, but Aiyana held up her hand. "Wait. Let's see who it is before we assume the worst." The riders who emerged into the ranch compound were not what anyone expected. Sam Rodriguez led the group, followed by Agent Crawford, several cavalry troopers, and most surprisingly Jake Morrison with his hands bound behind his. "Sorry we're late," Sam called out, his face grim with exhaustion. But we caught our conspirator. Jake Morrison looked nothing like the confident troublemaker Aiyana remembered. His face was haggard with fear, and his clothes were torn from hard riding and rougher handling. "Tell them," Agent Crawford commanded, dismounting with the authority of federal law behind him. "Tell them what you told us." Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. "It was Bartholomew Mining Company. They paid me and a half-dozen other men to stir up trouble, make it look like the Apache were breaking agreements. They wanted the military to clear out the reservations so they could get at the copper deposits underneath." The confession hit both groups like a physical blow. They had come so close to destroying each other, over lies manufactured by men who saw them all as obstacles to profit. "The murders?" Harrison asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Bartholomew's men. They figured killing a few Apache cowboys and trying to burn you out would be enough to start a war. When that didn't work fast enough, they decided to eliminate the peacemaker too." Jake's eyes found Aiyana. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I swear. I just needed the money." Chief Esperanza stepped forward, and for a moment, Aiyana thought he might kill Jake Morrison with his bare hands. Instead, the Apache leader spat in the dust at Jake's feet. "You would sell blood for gold," he said in English, his voice heavy with contempt. "You are less than nothing." But it was Thomas Harrison who spoke the words that mattered most. "Chief, I owe you and your people an apology. I let fear make me forget everything we built together." Esperanza studied Harrison's face for a long moment, then slowly extended his hand. "Forgiveness is for the strong, Thomas Harrison. We are both strong enough." The handshake between the two leaders seemed to release all the tension that had been building toward violence. Apache warriors and white cowboys began moving among each other, sharing water and food, checking on friends they had thought they might have to fight. But Aiyana barely noticed the reconciliation around her. The emotional toll of the last 24 hours was finally hitting her. The terror of being hunted, the heartbreak of seeing her careful work nearly destroyed, the weight of responsibility for so many lives. She slid down from Esperanza's back and buried her face against the mule's neck, finally allowing the tears she had held back for so long to flow freely. Esperanza stood perfectly still, providing the solid comfort of unconditional love, while her friend sobbed out months of stress and fear. "It's over, girl," she whispered into the mule's warm coat. "We did it. We actually did it." But even as she spoke the words, Aiyana knew it wasn't really over. There would be other conspiracies, other attempts to destroy the peace she had worked so hard to build. The forces that profited from conflict wouldn't give up just because one plot had been exposed. As if reading her thoughts, Thomas Harrison approached, his face serious but no longer hostile. "Miss Martinez, Aiyana, I have a proposition for you." She looked up, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "What kind of proposition?" "Stay here. Make the rocking Mule your headquarters. I'll build you a proper house, stable Esperanza in the finest accommodations, and pay you a salary that reflects your true value." Harrison's voice grew more passionate as he spoke. "Help me turn this ranch into a model for the whole territory. Show everyone that Apache and White can not only coexist, but prosper together." Chief Esperanza nodded approvingly. "Is good off, but I add to it. Become honorary daughter of Apache Nation. Sit in council, speak for all our people in territorial government. Bridge world with wisdom and courage." The offers were more than generous. They were validation of everything she had worked toward. But as Aiyana looked around at the faces of both Apache and white men who had been ready to kill each other an hour ago and were now sharing food and laughter, she realized something profound. "Thank you both," she said quietly. "But I think my work is bigger than any one place. There are other communities, other conflicts, other chances to build bridges between people who think they're enemies." She turned to face Esperanza, who was watching the conversation with her usual intelligence. "What do you think, girl? Ready to see more of this big territory?" Esperanza's soft whinny sounded almost like agreement, and for the first time in days, Aiyana smiled, really smiled, with joy instead of just relief. Then it's settled. We'll go where we're needed most, build peace one handshake at a time, and prove that trust is always stronger than fear. As the sun reached its peak over the Rockingham Ranch, Aiyana Martinez and her partner Esperanza began planning their next mission. Around them, Apache and white men worked side by side to repair the damage that hatred had done, while in the distance, the desert stretched endlessly toward new horizons and new possibilities. The outcast had become a bridge builder, the broken mule had become a healer, and together they carried the hopes of two peoples toward a future where children of all colors could drink from the same stream without fear. The story that had begun in exile and desperation had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of trust, and the unbreakable bond between two souls who had chosen to walk the difficult path of peace together. In the years that followed, the legend of the Apache woman and her wise mule would spread across the American West, inspiring others to choose understanding over hatred, cooperation over conflict, and hope over despair. But that was a story for another day. Today it was enough that they had saved the peace, honored their promises, and proven once again that love in all its forms was indeed the strongest force in the world.